morning to our audience from America, good afternoon in Africa and Europe, and good evening in Asia and Oceania. I'm César BazánSeminario from the University of Freiburg, Institute for Sociology. I'm a fellow at the Arnold Bergstressen Institute and member of the Latin American Sociological Association. On my name and on the name of Sheila Fernandez-Miguez, co-organizers, and all the people who contribute to the organization of this webinar, I'm worried welcome you as our speaker. The 2 days webinar, Understanding the COVID-19 Crisis, Critical Reflections on the Contribution of Sociology of Law, was born out of the need to think critically on the role that sociology of law scholars play in the current crisis. The global spread of the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly affected our daily lives. It also has substantial legal ramifications. On the one hand, several governments have taken legal measures, for instance, declaring a state of emergency, closing borders, enforcing social isolation, implementing unemployment compensation, promulgating new rules for the use of police forces, restricting access to some justice service, providing medical care, regulation, and adopting policies for the reduction of prison populations. On the other hand, the pandemic and these measures may further increase social inequalities of various kinds and reduce possibilities for the exercise of legal rights and access to justice. This conference aims to address some of the legal implications of the COVID-19 pandemic for understanding law in society. In particular, the role of law in enable government policies and implication for legal rights. This webinar is possible thanks to the invaluable support of 3 institutions: the Research Committee of Sociology of Law at the International Sociological Association, ISA, the Latin American Sociological Association, ALAS, and the Arnold Bergstressen Institute. Before we start, some technical indications. First, the webinar will be recorded and uploaded on the internet. Second, the exchange of ideas is essential for us. The participants have the chance to use the question and answer sections on the downside of your screen to do questions to the speakers, and we will open the microphones for questions and comments. With this brief introduction, I leave the word to the President of the Latin American Sociological Association, Dr. Jaime Ríos Burga, for welcome addresses. Dr. Ríos.
Thank you, César. I would like to thank, in the name of the Presidency and the Steering Committee of the Latin American Association of Sociology, ALAS, to César Bazán, our ALAS coordinator of the Working Group on Political Sociology and Social Legal Studies, to Sheila Fernandez, and each of the participants in the dialogue to reflect on the implication of COVID-19 in the present crisis, a crucial historical moment for humanity. Furthermore, I would like to thank the International Sociology Association, ISA, the Research Committee of the Law Sociology, and Arnold Bergstressen Institute. Without a doubt, the present global transformation redefines the social and legal relationship globally as part of the transformation of the world power. There is also importance of the dialogue from political sociology and the law, as well as changes in their legal implications. A dialogue and answer to the crisis and new demands for democratization of social life and government policies in the present systemic crisis that will lead to deep reforms and change in legal rights in line in all its forms. Thank you, César. Thank you to all of the participants. You can now moderate, César. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Dr. Ríos Burga. like to introduce our first speaker, Ulrike Schultz. She's president of the Research Committee of Sociology of Law at the International Sociological Association, ISA. Ulrike Schultz is a lawyer and retired senior academic at the Fernuniversität Hagen. She was for 30 years head of the didactics unit for the law faculty. She's specialized in European law, the sociology of legal professions, and questions of gender on law. Has set up and organized several further education programs at her university, such as Women on Law, Legal Skill Training, Law-Related Education, Virtual International Gender Studies, and a gender module in the Master of Laws. She has headed several big national research projects, amongst them Women in Leading Position in the Judiciary in North Rhine-Westphalia, and Women Law Professors in Germany. She works as a communication trainer for lawyers and the judiciary. We have 30 minutes for her presentation and 20 minutes for discussions. If we have questions or reactions to Ulrike's presentation, please write it on the question and answer chat. Sheila Fernandez-Miguez and I will deliver the questions, maybe a selection of questions, to our speaker. And we hope we have enough time for open microphones. Before I leave the word to Ulrike, from the beginning, she supported our project to link COVID-19 and sociology of law issues. I told her in private, but now in front of an audience, thank you very much for that. Without further ado, I leave you with Ulrike Schultz as our first speaker with the paper Global Coronavirus Crisis and the Role of Sociology of Law Scholars.
Thank you very much, César. And let me thank you and Sheila for arranging this seminar. It was on rather short notice, and I think it was a very courageous initiative, and I'm happy that it worked so well and that so many have signaled their interest. And even I've heard even of many who can't participate right now, but who are interested in the contents and who may check later the recording you are doing. I have prepared a PowerPoint, also with quite a lot of written stuff on it to facilitate the understanding of what I'm saying. I think that's important in these international meetings. So I try to open my PowerPoint. Here we go. Okay, I have to, yeah, okay. Nah. Yeah, okay, good. Here we have my PowerPoint on the global coronavirus crisis and the role of sociology of law scholars. This is that nasty little thing which is causing that much trouble. And speaking about the subject, Corona, COVID-19, well, in Germany, we used to say Corona. In other countries, COVID-19. Corona is the virus, and COVID-19 is the disease, the lung disease. And let me just sum up how it started to get a basis of what we should discuss later on. In January, we heard about the disease in China, Wuhan, which was quite far away. Then at the end of January, the World Health Organization gave an international public health emergency call. Then in February, we got the pictures from Bergamo and Brescia in Lombardy, Italy. Later it was in New York, and we got a little nervous. But still, by mid-March, till mid-March, nothing happened that much in Germany. And we even wanted to go skiing to Switzerland on the 14th of March. And on the 13th, I rang up our landlady and said, I think it's not such a good idea to come. And she said, but you will have to pay. Just to show the timeline and how people dealt with it. Well, we did not go. And 2 days later, the borders were closed. Then in the second half of March, the shutdown happened in many places in Europe, in Latin America. It was a little later because there the plague started a little later. In Germany, around the 23rd of March, the reproduction rate was already very low. But that was when the shutdown started. So that was a little amazing. And afterwards, the question was, we always have a before and afterwards in what we think about the whole crisis. So afterwards, the question was, did we need all these measures we've taken? But at the time, there were doomsday scenarios, Angela Merkel giving emotional messages, take care of your parents and grandparents, don't infect them. And well, that went on for 2 months. Then at the end of May, we started, after long discussions with careful relaxation rules, people demanded more. There was a lot of trouble about the relaxation rules. We'd gained some knowledge about the virus. And then now we thought, oh, maybe it's all done with the infections, but now there are new variations of the virus, mutations, new infections now in Peking, and new infections also in other places. Now, this is Mother Merkel with a very optimistic glance. We will manage. That's her message all the time. Of course, that we will manage is good, but also the mixed message, be careful, it's so dangerous, scared people a lot. And in the end, almost 70% of people in Germany were really content with what our government has done. Government, not parliament. So the question was, who is infected and how? So the question was, is it a disease of the old ones, of the young ones? It seems that the young ones don't catch the disease so easily and don't pass it on that much. We've just learned that the blood type matters. I'm zero positive, wonderful. This is what I learned. And pre-existing conditions matters. Old people tend to have pre-existing conditions, and then there are vulnerable groups. We have hotspots, so-called families, people living close together. We have events in meat factories. We had events in the context of religious services. This annoyed me, I must say, because the churches and all these sects should be particularly careful. Today, the Spiegel, our weekly paper in Germany, wrote, the social profile of Corona is becoming increasingly evident. High-rise buildings in Göttingen, that's a German city, a quarter in Berlin-Neukölln, slaughterhouses with a high proportion of temporary workers from Southeast Europe. A considerable proportion of the new hotspots appear in the milieu of the underprivileged, the poor, the non-integrated in this society. And this is true in many countries, and for example, also in Sweden. You may know that we wanted to have our RCSL meeting this year in Lund in Sweden, and the colleague with who I am organizing the event, which we have postponed to next year now, told me that in Sweden there's a lot of trouble because they have the disease in refugee camps and also among poor migrants. But it's not just that society is mean to these people, it's all, we have groups of people who simply do not want to obey rules. And this, of course, drives the other parts of the population quite mad and causes difficult discussions in our society. So what's contagious? Yes, the aerosols. Is it closeness, singing, touching things? Well, the balance so far is that we have millions of COVID-19 cases and hundreds of thousands obviously have died. The statistics are difficult. That is something we will have to discuss in our social legal work too. The working of the statistics and what the statistics have told us and whether they were reliable. And by no means this is close to the Spanish flu we had between 1918 and 1920. but still there the measures were taken were about the same we have taken now. The question was, what is special about corona compared to influenza? Because it started at a time of the year when we always have influenza. And many people also die of influenza. So was it necessary to take particular measures? That was the question to the politicians. Well, the point is, if people have influenza, hospital treatment as a rule is not necessary. With corona infections, in serious cases, it is necessary. And there the point was, do we have enough capacities? And the big point was, we have to have the capacities to save doctors from taking the decision, who do I have to offer the respiratory aid? This is called triage. You will have heard about it. The dilemma situation, who do I give preference? We lawyers have a lot to do with dilemma situations. But there were also drawbacks to that. They kept lots of bed for corona sick cases, and others didn't get treatment. And we do not yet know how many died because they didn't get treatment. I needed a blood test during that close down, and nobody wanted to offer me the blood test. Finally, I went to a laboratory directly to have my blood tested. Some who didn't want to get treatments, we have old people who say if we get into a serious state, we don't want to get treatment, they got it. Because they were also scared of making mistakes during the crisis. Then regular cancer treatment, regular treatment of heart diseases, organ transplants were postponed. And another point was, because they kept so many beds open and then people didn't dare to go to the hospital, hospitals have run into big economic problems. They had right now to cut the salary of staff. For some time, everybody was hailing all these wonderful people who help people and who want to cure people, and now they get financial cuts, which is nasty. Well, I give you the German situation with a view to the international situation, but I think much of that is in all countries. So is corona the crisis or just a crisis? Corona has augmented the effects of crisis which were already there. And that is something we have to discuss, something very nasty. We had the crisis of democracy anyway. I come back to democracy in a minute. There was a growing amount of authoritarianism, and now corona is taken as an excuse to solidify autocracy. We have constitutional crises in many countries. We have an EU crisis. We have a crisis of globalization. We may welcome that we have that crisis. The global economy is suffering. We maybe have a crisis of capitalism. We may welcome that. We have a crisis of our justice system. Anyway, there are many dysfunctional things in our justice systems. I come back to some of that a little later. The rule of law is suffering anyway. In many countries, we need a lot of analysis of that, of what's been there, what's been changed through corona. And we have infringements of the freedom of speech and mind. With problems, we had problems with migration, violence, social stratification, the widening gap between poor and rich, ecological crisis, the crisis of the natural resources, and maybe all these crises and the corona crisis is nothing compared to the pending or ongoing climate change, which could make the world uninhabitable. but also people are discussing advantages of the crisis. So it's something people have in themselves. If something bad happens, they always try to find a good thing to what is happening. And so this could, they say, this could be a good moment to rethink society and to reorganize life in a better way. But we, of course, have to discuss what is the better way. So initially, just preventive measures were proposed, and then government gave an obligation for preventive measures. Government. Only later on it was confirmed by Parliament. So in italics, I have the measures which were just for everybody to decide on to do it. Washing the hands, you had all these nice things on WhatsApp and YouTube, how you have to wash your hands. Then the disinfection, I have a nice picture here about disinfection. And 2 days ago, we finally in Germany got the Corona app. I will download it in a minute. And about 65% of Germans have said, yes, we want to download the Corona app. Nobody knows how useful it is. And the question was, will it make an inroad into our data protection? But then others say, well, we are glass people anyway, because we have WhatsApp, we have LinkedIn, we have Google, we have all these things we use on the internet. So the question is, what is more dangerous, Corona data app or the Corona data app against it? Well, and then the prescribed things, that the thing we were forced to do. Now, using masks, and there are many discussions, are they useful or harmful? So is it a good rule? Is it not a good rule? Then social distancing, social isolation. And I give you percentages here. And these percentages are taken from a very interesting survey, which Kim Economides, a colleague in Sociology of Law, sent me when I circulated the announcement for this webinar. There is a group working on global access to justice, and they have done a Corona survey in many countries. And so these percentages are from this brand new survey. So then there was canceling of big events. You know, in Germany, they play football now in front of empty ranks with no spectators. Travel restrictions from and to abroad, mandatory closure of educational institutions, non-essential businesses were closed. That it was discussed what is essential, what is non-essential. Borders were closed, some or all in some countries. A complete lockdown was so far in 47% of the countries involved in that survey, and it was many. I think it was like 70 countries. I've just forgotten the number. And the lockdown was had measures with it. That it was connected to a penalty of imprisonment in 40% of the countries involved in the survey. A fine was prescribed in 75% of the countries. In Germany, many people got a fine who didn't obey the rule of social distancing. So now, and as sociologists and people in sociology of law, we also have to take a look at the actors and which actors are involved on the national level, European and international level. It's government, it's parliament, prosecution and police, maybe the courts, the health system, then experts, and that's a very important point, the virologists, epidemiologists, biologists, medical doctors, all those people who give good advice, the media, interest groups, and activists. On the European level, the international level, it's the European Union, international institutions like the World Health Organization, World Bank, companies, globally acting companies, also non-profit organizations, interest groups, activists, and organized crime. And in all cases of catastrophes, organized crime is there telling people we are going to help you and trying to get a maximum profit out of what is happening. That will deserve a very close look afterwards. So the question was how to find a good balance with the measures and prescriptions. Who is allowed to stay at home? Who must go out to work? Who must take risks? Who is forced to give up mobility? For whom are such restrictions a loss of freedom? For whom a rather uncanny risk for pupils at school? How do we socialize with social media? How do families cope with the burden of homeschooling? And how does this relate to inequality? Now, with all these coercive measures, the democracy got on hold. We had a shift from parliament to executive. And this is something which has to be observed very closely. A very bad example has been given by Hungary. They have passed immediately an authorization act. Government is now allowed to rule by absolute decree indefinitely. There is no limit to it. In Germany, we have a time limit to everything which has been decided. In Germany, we also started with governmental measures, but meanwhile, we have parliamentary acts and more parliamentary acts are passed because only parliament can check. This is governmental measures are against the checks and balances, of course. For us in Germany, it's a very sensible matter due to the enabling act Hitler had got on the 21st of March 1933, which gave him legislative power for acts and which gave him the power to deviate from the Constitution and change the basic law in the constitutions. By the way, in the US, we've had something similar with the Patriot Act in the aftermath of 9/11. So suddenly we had a strong protectionism, but people also wanted the strong state. This is why so many people were content with the governmental measures. We had suddenly new borders and a new nationalism. So regarding the political decisions worldwide, we had different models. Some countries chose the shutdown. Some countries simply ignored the epidemic. That was Belarus. Some started with ignoring and some changed their strategy later on. That was Russia, but they went back to ignoring. Some opted for herd immunity, like Sweden. The question was, who has taken the decision? Who was the real person to decide? And here we got a very strange relationship between the experts and the politicians. In Germany, we got the saying of Kanzlerinnenflüsterer, Chancellor Whisperer, all these experts telling Angela Merkel what to do. But then, citation here, it's not science that makes politics. Political responsibility means not hiding behind science, but facing the uncomfortable question discussed in this system. And deciding on who has to decide what's the role of experts, we can go back to two experts of sociology and sociology of law. And here I go back to Max Weber, who, by the way, had the 100th anniversary of his death just 4 days ago. And he, by the way, died of the Spanish flu, and which was a model for the current pandemic. He was dealing with leadership, the political leadership. In his very famous book on politics as vocation, or politics as a profession, he was dealing with the sense of proportion and passion. And he said scientists have to abstain from any ideological evaluation, and in no circumstances should a researcher be allowed to say what is right to do in a given situation. And in the result, quite similar is what we've learned from Niklas Luhmann, dealing with the different social systems fulfilling different functions. So science as a system and politics as a system. And he says, science gains knowledge and strives for truth. Politicians make collectively binding decisions and take political decisions. So it's the role of science to inform, but seeing the limits of what they do, and they can only strive for truth. They do not have the truth. Science, if you look to the bottom, I don't go in details here, science cannot produce conclusive truth. Research results allow always for different interpretations. You know that about statistics and different decision situations. And here we have different decision situations due to the global dimensions and the time factor, which had to be taken into account. So maybe some of the early decisions were very wrong, but there was the time factor and politicians had to act. All this needs analysis. So democracy, we've learned many lessons about democracy in this crisis. What is important is the communication. Base it less on fear, more on information. Don't emotionalize too much. And it was indeed difficult to take decisions as no one knew the mechanisms and the working of that virus. And what we also learned, the crisis has created new mass movements and also strange mass movements. And what also happens in these instances is that conspiracy theories rise, and then it's in the end always the Jews who want to create a new world order, the Rothschilds or whatever bad people who want to take over. And what has communication and information, what has to be watched closely is the role of the media. They have constructed the pandemic. They have distorted information. They have created fear. There was a lot of alarmism, and there was a lot of what I would call catastrophe prurience, which has annoyed me. And there's also a lot of political correctness. Some things are not discussed and not named, and that drives many citizens crazy. They get annoyed because they want to have the full information to decide themselves and not a guided information. But of course, on the other hand, we also have the problem that the virus infects freedom of press, and the Reporters Without Borders have warned about it. Governments which were given special powers passed emergency laws or measures and made it difficult, for example, for judges to be appointed, Poland, and high penalties for false report. But of course, it happens that things are reported falsely. And so reporters got what we call a Maulkorb. And there was a clear disruption to our justice system. In that survey I told you about, only 8% of the justice systems were reported to work normally. After my talk, you get that report on indigenous people and access to justice. In some countries, juries are on hold. The juries in civil justice. Kim Lane-Scheppele, in the framework of LSA, is doing research on that. The question is, can claimants get fast remedies if justice doesn't work properly? No, they don't. Injunctions are almost not possible. That gives a loss in credibility, which is there anyway. For example, in Germany, our civil justice has lost a third in caseload. And I could give you an analysis of this, but this is a special other subject. Anyway, arbitration is gaining in importance, a civil system. So here we have a move from state to private. I've been working quite a lot about arbitration lately. So then impact on women families. the effects of violence, despair. What is happening with that shutdown? Families staying at home, homeschooling, the old gender role model are cemented, and it's deepening the gender pay gap. A citation from yesterday's newspaper: it is as if through a magnifying glass, experiences of inequality emerge that have not been addressed politically or addressed sustainably, legally. Occupation, which are now called systemically relevant, this is all the nurses, which are more feminine, more precarious, and less bound by collective agreement. So they are hailed, but in the end, they're losing again. Then we have the effect of a rising violence in families, a rise in violence against women, gender violence. Brazil reported a rise in femicides. The question is, do we have more suicides because of the shutdown, psychic disorder, depressions? All that will have to be worked out. We have to find out about it. Also in trying to find out, was it good to take these decisions, not good? What was it we had to do? Then the impact on the economy. An enormous impact on economic activities, enormously rising insolvency.
You yes. Have 5 minutes.
Yes. I just read that the fur industries in the Netherlands suffer, so they might be abolished. They had to kill all minks because they are said to carry the virus. Jobless claims. 81% of the working population worldwide have been reported to be affected. Air travel collapse, public transport close to collapse. Many hoped, maybe still hope, that it is a V-shaped effect. This is the V-shape, just a cut and then everything rising again, but nobody believes it any longer. There are few winners for people selling bikes or people selling masks, this kind of industries or online trade, but many, many losers. And of course, there are users and abusers. As government is spending a lot of money in this crisis, in Germany, we were lucky to have a good economy. So government can spend a lot of money, but everybody's thinking now they're spending too much. And of course, if there's something, there are always abusers. I could give you a nice example of that. Here is our finance minister, Olaf Scholz, and reading this. This is a very nice picture, Max Weber, about politics as a profession or devotion. So money injection, lots of money injection, printing new money. And this is today throwing a lot of money on people, but they can't go on like that. And this may be the situation tomorrow. And there's a bitter conclusion. We have a country under the rescue umbrella. The state shields us, but the price for this Corona special collection is later paid by nobody else but the protected and the young generation. We learn everything can be bought nowadays, and even an illusion of prosperity. So I've given you impacts and their middle-range consequences. I will be fast on that because I'm running out of time. Is there deglobalization, changes in global trade and production? Are the traditional cities dying because of more online trade? Well, we already have the signs. Further increase in online trade. Consumption patterns changing. IT, artificial intelligence, virtual life changing, change in mobility. And there is an ongoing destabilization. If there is a destabilization, there comes more on top. And many people are convinced that all these riots we have now about racism, it's very important to demonstrate against racism, but it's close to riots now. And the riots are also caused because there's a destabilization anyway. And because of COVID-19, global poverty will increase for the first time since 1998. Is there special disaster for Africa? Right now, they say not really. It seems that the infection right now is not so bad there as expected. Then we have long-term consequences? Will our lives after the crisis will be the same as before regarding activities, traveling, cultural life, social security, the health, the welfare state, healthcare, employment, work behavior, for example, working in home office, our values, and the impact on trust this has had? Is it the end of capitalism, the traditional world order of the past decades? So our role as social legal scholars, and this is how I come to the end, we have to describe, we have to analyze processes and decisions. This is naming. We have to point to mistakes, kind of blaming. Blaming is a strong expression, I know, but this naming and blaming is common in sociology of law. And we have to discuss solutions. I have called it framing because it rhymes so well. And do we learn from the crisis? What should we learn? Or should we just go back to what we have had before, to old growth and expansion? I think most people will agree that rather not. So here I have sources, you can read that afterwards, and these are my content details. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have many questions to ask, many comments, and of course what I've said could not be complete because it's such a wide field, but I hope I got many important points to tell you.
Thank you very much, Ulrike. Now, please don't share your screen.
Okay, I finished sharing my screen. Okay, good.
Thank you very much. So now we have time for questions. We have about 20 minutes. Please, if you want do a question, let me know with the button for hand up. So I give you directly the word. So there was a very interesting presentation. I was thinking about this idea of rethinking society. I know this is an opportunity to rethink in society, but I'm not, really to say, I don't have high expectation that happen, because the capitalism and the social inequalities will reproduce it together with this very interesting idea you said, that the crisis, this is not a crisis of COVID, but this is the COVID increased the crisis we have, and increase our crisis to access to justice, increase our crisis on jails, in all the situation we live, increase our civilization crisis with the word in our civilization crisis, using a terminology from Jaime Ríos, that usually Jaime Ríos Burga. And I want to ask you more about you think what we, the law scholars, the sociology of law scholars, should do: describe, analyzing process and decision, points to mistake, discuss solution. Do you think this that we are doing that right now? Should we do
right
it?
now? Sorry, I was distracted.
I repeat it. The role we play,
again.
About the role we play, the sociology of law scholars. Do you think we are right now describing the problem, analyzing the process, point a mistake, discuss a solution? What is your balance about our role?
Okay. I think we've started a little late, like everybody, but we needed to have some substance to analyze. I checked around the internet what's going on, and you know, we have LSA Talk, which is like a well, an information service about what's going on in LSA, and there was not that much about Corona. I mentioned that about the juries. So I was happy that when Kim Economidis wrote me about that survey, there was the question here, is it available, the survey? Yes, on the last overhead, in my presentation, I had the link to the survey, but if you write me an email, I gave you my email address. I'm happy to send you the link. And so I think research will mushrooming. Now, often research is depending on money. And about a week ago, I got the note that European institutions and also the German research institutions now have opened funds for applications, and these are short-term applications for research. So of course we could do research ourselves, and I think for me it was a wonderful possibility to be asked to give this presentation, to sum up all what I had read and think about it and bring it into a pattern. And I hope it will help others to structure their thoughts and also to find out where detailed research is needed and where they could apply for research funding. So please, colleagues, start immediately now. There is so much on the street now, in the road, which you can work at, and it will be so rewarding because it's our old questions framed in a new way, and also, of course, new questions. But I think we haven't had such a serious crisis to democracy. We had a crisis, but never such a serious one. And many governments abusing the situation, that we need very thorough analyses of well, non-democratic, no longer democratic systems, and what is happening to democracy, and on many of the details I have mentioned. And in the, I'd also given a link to the ISA, International Sociological Association website. They have also started to ask groups for comments, and there is something on it, two quite nice speeches by the president and the vice president, also summing up some effects, but they of course are sociologists. I've tried to focus the sociological perspective more down to sociology of law, but of course we have the general sociological perspective, the social legal perspective, the political the perspective of political sciences. And so I also recommend to consult that website because they will go on storing material there, which can be very interesting for you.
Thank you. We have a question from Jessica Neukun. Sheila, could you give Jessica the word, open the microphone for Jessica?
I think it's open.
Okay.
Hello, thank you for accepting my question. I just have a question about the study I think Ms. Schultz mentioned about the implementation of preventive measures by different governments in different parts of the world. And I would like to have more details, or probably a link or something about the methodology or the result if they're already published. That's it.
Okay. Well, all the time I've read newspapers. I have, and on the internet you find daily updated statistics worldwide, what is going on in other countries. The internet is really, again, a very rich source there. I have attended talk shows every night because I found it so interesting and wanted to learn more. And so I do not have a link, for example, to Chile or to Brazil, but our colleagues there are doing many things. And I think by and large, or rather sooner than later, our national associations will also post new findings or scholarly projects on corona on their websites. And we should also do it on our research committee website, Research Committee for the Sociology of Law. So we could insert links there. So I can only refer you to the rich sources in the internet and to ISA. There is a question here, and I can't understand what is meant. The frames are expensive, right? Asked by Mr. Schill from Freiburg. I don't know what you mean with that question. You will have to elaborate a little more.
She have a word, or he have a word? Schill from the Uni Freiburg? Ah, he. You don't have the word. Excuse me. Solicitar active. Right now you can use the, okay.
Okay.
Okay. No, it was a positive aspect.
A little louder, please.
It was a positive aspect. Can you hear me? The connection?
Yes. Yes.
All right. In which forms, like media frames, can be changed? I think it's good to, when people are on the street, right? It's good to be in a local way together and work on global aspects with positive frames. But like with an actor and the network, the conclusion is that where it's bound, we have to change the frames in a positive way to act local and change global.
Ah, okay, I understand you. This is rather a comment than a question. Right. Yeah, we have the movements and the mass movements in the street now, demonstrations, lots of demonstrations which started towards the end of the shutdown. And of course, they are putting the finger into many wounds we have. And so I think your message is not to see a destructive element in it, but to see a positive national or local impulse for global development there. This is how I understand you. I hope I get you right. And of course, these movements are extremely important, even if they go too far sometimes. But that's normal with these movements. I described some dangers connected to it if it gets close to riots. But of course, we have to frame it positively to get a gain from it for the development of society. Okay?
Thank you very much. The next on the list is Luis Pázara. Do you have the microphone open?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I want to thank to Professor Schultz for this panorama that he provided us. But the fields she mentioned in her presentation are various, and all of them are very interesting. However, if we take the perspective of a sociologist of law, in which particular aspect would you recommend we should work on? I mean, not as political scientists, that we are not sociologists or economists, that we are not, but so as sociologists of law, that we are. Please, if you could suggest some particular aspects or relevant points at this time of the pandemic that could be researched on. Thank you.
Okay, well, in the end, when it comes to measures, and measures are rules, maybe not laws, but we also deal with rules as people in sociology of law or social legal scholars, kind of informal laws. And and in the end, everything I've mentioned, which has an impact, is cast in law. For example, with the economic problems, we now have the Disinfection Act, or however it is called in Germany. And for example, the new act says we will have a deduction in the value-added tax for some parts. So that is a law. And what is the impact of this law? And if the price has to be paid, they will increase the value-added tax again, and there will be new taxes. They're discussing new taxes. All that has to be cast in law. So, you know, the boundaries between political sciences and general sociology here are a little blurred. But of course, well, you should frame your subject or choose your subject according to your specialization. My specialization is legal system. My specialization is court system, legal profession, and right now arbitration. So I will deal with that, and that these are clearly social legal issues. Then when it comes to the reactions under criminal law, the fines, the penalties, this is clear sociology of law. But you know, we have widened our focus from pure sociology of law to social legal. So as long as there's some rules, etc. implied, then all this falls into the sphere in which we are working. That at least is our international framing of the field. And then all the effects about, then we have to discuss, do we need more rules? What should these rules look like? This is, of course, is a question of legal politics, but also of sociology of law. What will be the results if we change the law? For example, in Germany, they're trying to change some acts now on violence. And we in sociology of law say, no, sorry, what we have, the rules are all right, but the judges don't apply them in a way they could. And so it's the practice of the court and not the rule which is not all right. So you see, the sociology of law is hidden there everywhere. But the question you asked was what I asked myself in the beginning, of course, too. Should I give this broad panorama, or should I just put my finger in two special points? But I thought it was better to give you the panorama so that everybody can pick the, well, not cherries, but the topics they would be interested in dealing with. I hope that helps you.
We have another two questions. Luciano, and then Jessica again. Please, Luciano. Yes, you don't have the microphone open.
Okay, you can listen to me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Ulrike, for your very interesting presentation. I will have like two comments, of course, so that you could elaborate a little more that I found very interesting of your presentation. The first is the matter of what the COVID crisis has revealed as a very big problem in our society, that is like the overcrowding problem in societies, and how it has affected a lot these specific places. For example, in Germany, you mentioned the COVID affected especially neighborhoods or places that were specifically very crowded. From in my country of origin, also in Chile, the problem is especially there in the very poor, overcrowded neighborhoods. Yes, even the health minister said that he wasn't aware of the very overcrowding problem that was happening in those areas. And the other is, I would like to ask you is, what do you see are the risk regarding this corona crisis? You mentioned, for example, the case of Hungary, like how this corona could be a path to totalitarianism, to a more cuts on our people's rights. And for example, another way to express this will be this Corona app that many countries are suggesting or taking into consideration, and that people, for example, could be forced to say or to show where they are only because they have or had the virus before. Thank you very much.
And immediately I give the word to Jessica for the last question, and then your answer, Ulrike.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. It's not necessarily a question, it's more a comment about the role of media. I heard this early this morning on the radio a studio that it seems to me that it was conducted in Germany about the role of social media or social networks and the impact of social network in the application or implementation by people of preventive measures. And it seems that people who are more active on social network respect less preventive measures because they trust also less in the government, etc. And I think that it was interesting because for me, is not only social network is important, but also independent media, especially in cases like in South America, for instance, we were talking about that, where there is no public broadcasting, no public media, especially television and radio, like in countries like France, where I live, or in the UK. And it's very interesting that people are, the trust in authorities is very important. That's something we know in terms of compliance with public health measures. But also, I mean, what is interesting for me is the role of media in terms of independent media, which could be the impact on people's behavior, and also the political role they have in terms of give another version, I mean, an alternative version to the official one, which is always, or I would say, influenced by government and political, I mean, social dominant class, I would say. So that was my comment about the role of media and the role in terms of in this moment of authorities is increasing, which is could be our role as sociologists of law in this case, in terms of the analysis of role of media and its political role.
Yes, that's a very important comment. Thank you very much. I told you in the beginning, I give you my German view and trying to open it to the world with as much as I have learned from the internet newspapers, public broadcasting, etc., etc. And of course, it will be very interesting to hear more from all these other countries. I try to check as much as possible, but still I'm German with my German experience in my back. Yes, and it's very interesting that we have this public broadcasting in Germany. There are always discussions, should it be abolished? They have just risen the fee for it. I think it's 15 euro now, something like that. People don't mind to spend 10 euro per month for Netflix, and now they mind spending 15 euro for our public broadcasting system. This is rather strange and amazing. Yes, and in countries without public broadcasting, the social media have still much more importance than in Germany. And of course too, but social media are always very dangerous too. I described you some dangers of the public, of all media, distorted information, etc., etc. And with social media, that can even be worse than with others. This is really a rich field for research. So thank you for that comment. Now for the question before, that about overcrowding in societies. Yes, we have the hotspots where many people live closely together, but it's a bigger point, that overcrowding in societies. This is a question which has worried me for a long time. Decades ago, we had in China and India the discussions about birth control. And somehow birth control, or rather as individual birth control, anyway, trying to reduce the number of births, it has disappeared from the political agenda. I don't know why. When the Pope went to the Philippines for the first time, a representative of the Catholic Church said something like, don't multiply like rabbits or something like that, which was quite nasty for a Pope to say. But that was about all. And I'm really astonished that this is not discussed more. And of course, we have to discuss the living conditions in city, also in what way this has to be steered by law, how many people can live on how many square meters, or how much space has to be there for people. We have rules on how much place a prisoner in prison has to have, but we do not have public rules about how much space a person in a flat should have. And then the question about the cut on people's rights. Yes, that's really the point. Democracy, the cuts on equality, on freedom. This is what people in the street were shouting about, that their freedom of movement is infringed. And with a cut on people's rights, of course, in Europe, the EU is threatened. If countries have these, like Hungary and Poland, have these severe measures against the independent judiciary, and government taking rules, passing rules instead, and parliament passing rules instead of government, then we have to be afraid that the EU is going to pieces. And then what is going to happen then? I'm really, really scared of it. And you've heard, there's the hard Brexit now with Britain, probably nothing possible to repair. So we are at a very dangerous crossroads these days, and Corona has augmented it. I hope I've answered your questions sufficiently.
Thank you very much, Ulrike. We have a last questions, the last one. Mirza, I will read it. Mirza Kuitsia asks, in terms of the issues that people are facing during the crisis, are there certain factor of issues that women from minority religious community are facing at a greater level?
Okay. This is a very important comment and question. I told you about problems women have being pushed back into old gender roles in family, and women are always the weaker elements in society, and then of course from minorities too. And in times of crisis, others and women from minorities can be seen as others. And this is again a link to that, to these race demonstrations, will be seen and observed in a more hostile way than in more quiet times. If society is relaxed, it respects more diversity. In times of crisis, diversity can be regarded by a majority as endangering their position. This is a very difficult question, very difficult to solve. And here I think sociology overall has to come in and deal with it. But of course, it's also a question for sociology of law. Do we have to counteract with rules, or how do we deal with this? Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ulrike. Thank you very much, our audience, for these exciting discussions.